I'd like to introduce Paul Marion first. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Supply chain management, uproar, utopia. Let's see what we can do with it. I'd like to think that, like spare the rod, spoil the child, supplier beating is now thankfully largely a thing of the past. But it remains the case that a customer-supplier tension is still natural and part of the normal market pressure that we face. It's also worth looking at the nature of the customer-supplier interaction here and whether it's cosy or a bit more combative maybe, because at the heart of all of this is quite a simple situation really, and that is that customers want a low price, high quality, good service, whereas a supplier wants a fair price for their products, flexibility from the customers they serve, and a long-term guarantee that there's somebody there to buy the goods they actually produce. What gets in the way of the compromise to satisfy both of these situations is that customers quite rightly have an understandable, I've said obsession, but obviously need, I think, to have regular testing of the market to make sure they're not paying too much for their goods and services. They need to manage risk by the diversification of the supply chain, and also just the nature of competition means that there's always going to be a certain amount of needle, a little bit of tension maybe in the situation. And all of that, it must be said, works reasonably well in the real world. However, there's a new kid on the block really, and I've called this carbon crime. It wasn't me, it was sort of him, and the reason for that really is that now if you produce a lot of carbon, that's considered as being some sort of crime, rightly so. We have targets here to meet, etc. And it creates a new dynamic in the supply chain. For those at the end of the product chain, most of these carbon crimes are committed for them by their suppliers. So the whole issue about where carbon is produced within the production cycle of any product or service is getting quite interesting. Now, how are we going to make this whole situation work for us? Well, obviously beating suppliers with a stick may not be the best way to get them to reduce their carbon production, and I think, as the other speakers will be saying later on, that's not the way to do it anyway. There are far better ways of getting a good performance from the supplier. And really that's about sharing responsibility, I think, for achieving savings of carbon. And it's a better way, but it requires a new way of the supply chain interacting. And I think that's going to create a few issues. What I'll do as I go forward is to show you how we've been interacting in this particular area and some of the interesting outcomes from that. But what I want to do really is to just concentrate on one area when I'm actually doing that, and that's in the energy area and the renewable energy area in particular. Renewable energy can provide a second trading point between the partners within a supply chain, and it can increase the profitability of both. And that can be quite interesting and quite useful in what I've called a fragile supply chain. The approach here also will cut out this carbon crime and may actually increase market share as the market begins to demand lower carbon products. But I think we need to be aware that the supply chain needs to be ready for this new kind of interaction, because unlike most other commodities, energy supply is on a far longer timescale. I'll talk to you now about 3 examples where we found this to be in a position to work. I'm not saying these are actually working now, but this is very much kind of the situation as we are now. The first one of these is in the food processing industry. Government is now actively supporting the anaerobic digestion process as a way of generating the renewable energy that we all sort of need from organic wastes. Supermarkets are very good, they produce little waste on their sites, but their supply chain obviously produces more. And we've got examples that we're working on now where, by partnering across the supply chain, AD can save some money for everybody and also carbon within the product that's finally produced. That's quite interesting because in a supermarket, as with most other of the retailers, most of the carbon impacts that they have is in the goods which are on their shelves. Another one is looking very much at a wind energy opportunity and here it's a dairy situation. Many farmers are sitting on a valuable resource in terms of wind energy, but don't necessarily know how to exploit it. We've been doing work in one situation where we've clearly shown that by working across the supply chain, the dairy can actually get a good situation with its energy supply, both in terms of cost and energy price stability. And obviously it gives a second income for the farmer, where market for milk is volatile and difficult and is very fragile. That one's quite interesting, and I think it's got every chance of working. Maybe the more interesting one is a bank that we're actually working with now. And here the banks clearly want their clients to be a success. They want them to make profit, especially now. And they also try and support their clients, these are all commercial clients clearly, by providing a large range of advisory services. And they know their clients' businesses well. Well, they should know their clients' businesses well. And we're in the very early stages now of talking to one of the banks about extending the advice that they give in order to include the renewables. And really the kind of plan here is to develop a wide portfolio of projects which can be rolled into one for funding purposes and also to actually take forward and develop. That was quite an interesting opportunity. So what's all this shown us? Well, I think that customers in the supply chain can guarantee a market for the renewable energy. In fact, all elements of the supply chain can, and often as you get nearer to the top of the supply chain, they're also the ones that really need the carbon kudos, the greenie points. Suppliers have to be very lean and mean in the way that they operate, and they probably don't have either the management time, expertise or effort to be able to go and look for opportunities, let alone bring them forward. And if the supply chain can work together to try and reduce the commercial risk of all of this, then the whole thing becomes to a kind of point where it can even be picked up by a specialist developer who can put some or all of the cash in. So it needn't even cost the supply chain money. So how real is this? I mean, is it really a fairy tale, or can it be brought forward? Now, I'm an eternal optimist, but I think the truth of the situation is that in order to meet the challenging targets of the Climate Change Act, we need to reduce the amount of carbon we produce by a quarter within a 10-year window. Now that is absolutely a mountain to climb. And so it's going to demand new approaches to the way that the supply chain operates and managed and is actually used. And I think that on the basis of that, really we don't have the option of uproar. It's beneficial collaboration, which is the only way that we can really take the whole thing forward. Thank you.